Hi, I'm David Kais, and I run R for the rest of us. You may think of R as a tool for complex statistical analysis, but it's much more than that. From data visualization to efficient reporting to improving your workflow, R can do it all. On this podcast, I talk with people about how they use R in unique and creative ways. I'm delighted to be joined today by Cara Thompson. Cara is a data visualization consultant with an academic background specializing in helping research teams and data-driven organizations turn their data insights into clear and compelling visualizations. She lives in Edinburgh, Scotland with her husband and 2 daughters, and Cara regularly shares coding tips for data viz online and genuinely enjoys helping others level up their data viz skills through talks, bespoke organizational training, and one-on-one coaching. So Cara, welcome and thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. And I should also mention, Cara, you've done work with R for the rest of us in the past. I said to you before we got on the call, I've been really excited to watch you, build your own business, which has been great to see as you've done that. A little sad for me because it's meant that I've had less of your skills available to do R for the rest of us stuff. But I'm excited to chat with you. Well, I'm excited to talk with you, Cara, about all things color, because one of the things that you've really gotten into is thinking about how to use color in plots. So why don't I just dive into the first question? I think when people think about colors, if they work for an organization and they're thinking, okay, well, we want to make data viz, the natural kind of first step would be, great, let's use our brand colors. So, if you have like a blue and orange, great, throw them in, make some plots. But I know that you've talked about why you can't just kind of take brand colors and use them directly in data viz. So can you talk about why that's the case?
Yeah, sure. I think brand colors are always a good place to start if you're looking to create visualizations for your organization. But there are a few things to look out for. One is that they haven't always been designed with accessibility in mind. And so if I remember a project that we worked on together, David, where there was an orange and a blue, that when you put them through a colorblind test, they actually looked very similar to each other if they were done just in grayscale, for example. And so you want to be a little bit careful about just taking your brand colors, because it might mean that the plots actually don't work for quite a large group of people. The other reason why you might not want to just use your brand colors is you might need more than the brand colors that you've got. So say you're working for EasyJet and they want you to do some visualizations of their data. If everything is orange, that can be a bit overwhelming, and you might need some more colors than that. One of the challenges that I really enjoy is taking a brand color and figuring out how we can build that into a palette of the number of colors that we need that work within the accessibility guidelines, and that also help us convey the story that we want to convey.
So in cases where, you say you don't have brand colors, or even I guess maybe when you do, how do you get inspiration to come up with color palettes that are going to work well for data viz?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's lots of different things that you can do. In terms of general inspiration, I like hanging out in art galleries. There's something really inspiring about seeing how artists have gone about combining colors, people whose specialism it is to create beautiful visual things or visual things that are really striking. So that's a general source of inspiration that I would recommend to anyone. I find kids' books, I read a lot of books to my daughters, and I guess because of the way that illustrations are done in children's books, the colors are often quite vivid, and that's quite a fun source of inspiration as well. But if you're talking specifically about a project that you're working on, often there are colors that you can go to that will be tied to the project. So, for example, I've done this a few times when I've created a story about the penguins. So the Palmer penguins is a data set that's used quite a lot in data science. To demo a few things. It's a really fun data set to use because of the correlations that are inside it. And so I tend to invent little stories about the penguins baking things. And I have done this thing a few times where I show a plot with default colors, And I asked people, which penguins were baking with ripe bananas, which ones were baking with overripe bananas, and which ones were baking with underripe bananas. And if you color it, green and yellow and brown, then it's obvious which one's which. Now, that's a bit of a literal understanding of how colors can map onto things. But sometimes starting with thinking about the concept that you're talking about and what colors are associated with that can be a great way to start. Does that make enough sense, or shall I elaborate?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's great because I think, for a lot of people when they start out, if they're thinking, okay, I have to come up with a color palette, like where do you even start? They're, infinite colors potentially. So,
Yeah.
how are you gonna decide what to use? So I think looking at, books, say, or art galleries, or I know you've also talked about using photos. I'm curious, like how you would look at a photo, say, and use that to generate ideas, and why you think that type of approach works.
Yeah, so I can show you a photo that I've used as inspiration for a palette for a project. You can see here is a photo of a mountain in British Columbia. And this was for a project where the person that asked me to come up with the color palettes was coming up with a system in which he needed different users to have different views. And we needed to make sure that it kind of made sense to the semantics of what was going on. And so there was an old system that we were going to be trying to replace. And so that was represented with the kind of shadowy purple colors that we have here. Then we had the new system, the new growth. So we went for green to represent that. And then I wanted to kind of honor the people who would be using the system, who were mostly the administrators involved in the project. But they were the ones that had the bird's eye view of the whole thing. And so I wanted to put them at the top of the mountain. And so we kind of picked a color from the top of the mountain to illustrate that. And then the final color was the color associated with the group that he was looking to create the system for. And so here are the colors that we ended up with, which, they work quite nicely together. And I'll come into a little bit more about how we can achieve that. But when I talked about, picking colors, obviously you're not going to create plots always that are about literal things. So you can be a bit more creative in your interpretation of which colors are going to work well for the plots. So another fun one, there's a paper that's just been published actually for which I did the visualizations, in which the authors were comparing how trustworthy news videos were based on whether they'd been entirely created by a human or if there'd been some AI involved in creating the video. And so for that, I kind of chose a pinky orange brain color, and then to be the human made stuff, and then a steely blue to be the computer made stuff. And then you kind of know that between pink and blue, you end up at purple. And so for the videos that were made partly by a human and partly by AI, you have a color that is interpretable straight away. So those are the more kind of the less literal versions of taking a photo or an idea and bringing colors from that.
It's interesting because, I think people, and myself included, would think about, okay, coming up with colors. Like I just need to think of what colors like look good together. But you're kind of taking a different tack where you're saying, well, let's, look at a photo. And obviously that photo of the mountains and the lake that you showed, like it's gorgeous, right? And so you kind of, by choosing colors that show up in that photo, like in some ways it seems like you're more likely to get colors that play well together because they, like it looks really beautiful in the photo. So then the colors will likely, look good on their own as well. It's just an interesting, like it's an indirect approach, but it seems like it yields good results and, avoids you potentially just being overwhelmed trying to think again of like, how can I choose some colors? So it's a really interesting approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing you've talked about is designing with accessibility in mind. I know you talked about that briefly a few minutes ago, but you've also said that designing with accessibility first can actually have benefits for all audiences. So I'm curious, like in the context of color, what does that mean, and how do you see that playing out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. So in the context of color, there's a bunch of recommendations that come to make things accessible, and they have positive consequences for everyone. One of the recommendations that I personally really resonate with is that if you're just using primary colors, so a kind of really bold red and a really bold green and a really bold blue, the ones that you get if you just type red, CSS red,
Right.
it's really overwhelming to look at because those colors they're just really in your face.
Yeah.
And so one of the recommendations is to use kind of slightly blended colors so that you don't end up with that really hard hitting color, which I think, you'll all come across a website that you open up and you think, gosh, this was designed when colors were a really big thing.
Right.
And it's just really difficult to read. Whereas if you go onto a website where things are a little bit more muted, it's easy. Now, that's not to say that it needs to all look like a 1970s film where everything is just that slightly, grayish color. No, you can have really fun colors within that. But if you try and kind of blend in a common color, then that tends to do the trick, which, I created a package to do that called monochromeR, which we can talk about as well if that's of interest.
Yeah. Well, before we get into that, this actually is kind of a little bit out of the blue, but I'm curious where your interest in colors in general comes from, because your PhD is in psychology, right?
Yeah.
And that people with that background, I mean, you don't have you don't have like an art PhD, say. So I'm just curious because I don't think it's super common for someone with your background to have as strong an interest in colors. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about where that comes from?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think I've always been interested in how the brain processes stuff. So I grew up in an English-speaking family in France. So there were two languages going on, and everybody plays a musical instrument. So there was music, there were two languages, and somehow we were all making sense of this. When you think about it and you reduce it, it's just noise. But at the moment, you and I are just exchanging sound waves, and yet it's communicating stuff from inside my head to inside your head. And I've just always found that fascinating. And I remember it maybe comes from that thing of growing up with two languages, that you have an appreciation of the fact that the world sounds and looks and feels different to different people. And I remember very early on asking, how come if we're talking about the color orange, do I know that you're seeing the same thing when I'm saying that? So I think it's more just a general interest in how other people perceive the world, and how we can make sure that communication is optimized across different contexts, across different perceptual idiosyncrasies. It's just something that's always interested me. And then the effect that you get, if you're going through a tunnel and there's funny lighting in it, you still know what color things are because you kind of do some kind of interpretation on that. So it's just, I think part of it is just curiosity. Part of it is wanting to make life as easy as we can for as many viewers of our visualizations as we can. And part of it is that, frankly, I just think it looks better when you take this into consideration. I didn't, we talked about the muted colors and all the blended colors. The other way in which it helps everybody is if, you bring your paper to somebody and they print it off in black and white, then they've got to still be able to read the plot. Or if you're presenting at a conference and the projector isn't great quality and that kind of messes up your visualizations, if you've optimized it so that people who sometimes struggle with color can see it as best they can, then it kind of helps you with all those different contexts as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know you've also talked about using color as a way to be kind of less dependent on annotations in data visualization. Can you give an example of how that might be the case?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two ways in which it can be the case. One is that it helps you remember what's what. And the other is that it helps you process a plot more quickly, so you don't actually have to read the annotations as much. So I'll just share my screen and you can see what I mean. Right, let's do a quick test. So here we're back at the mountain that I showed you earlier. We're going to do a quick test. I'm going to ask you the plot that I'm about to show you, which is the second ingredient from the bottom. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the options were chocolate, raspberry, sponge, and rhubarb. So we'll just go again. So here's the next plot. Okay, there we go. If instead I show you this one, and then we go back, you can remember much easier which ingredient was the one that was second from the bottom. So in this plot, the colors are very literal. We've got a chocolate color for the chocolate bar, we've got a raspberry color for the raspberry bar, we've got a sponge color for the sponge bar, and we've got a rhubarb color for the rhubarb bar. And that means that you don't really need to read that it says chocolate, raspberry, genoise, or sponge and rhubarb, because it's kind of there already in your mind. And when you walk away from the plot, you'll be able to remember that, raspberry was the second one, genoise was the third one, etc. So, whereas if you create the plot like this, the colors work really well together. They look really nice, but it's much more difficult. 2 days post-conference, someone says, "What was the second bar again in that plot?" You have no idea. Whereas if you do this, then you're probably more likely to remember. So that's a way in which I think they can make a bit less dependent on annotations, in that they make the legend not redundant, but they make it easier to remember what's what.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I should
Cool.
add,
Well, one other.
I wouldn't recommend
go
doing
ahead.
a rainbow bar graph all the time. So the
Okay.
rainbow bars are just there to demonstrate stuff. Someone pulled me up on this online. Yeah, it's true. If you create your bar graphs and every bar is different, then that's maybe not the best use of color. But this is just to illustrate that if you then had a scatter plot somewhere else, or some trend lines, if you've identified a clear color that's related to the concept that you're interested in, it's so much easier to remember what's what.
Well, and that sort of gets at, I know you've talked in various places about the idea of color semantics. It seems like that's sort of getting at that, right? Like the idea that you choose a color not just because you think it looks nice, but because it actually kind of represents something, like red for raspberry or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And then whether that's literal or more metaphorical, I guess the thing to be aware of in that is just making sure that you're not bringing too many cultural assumptions into what other people associate with that color. And again, being mindful of the main audience for your visualization, because that might influence the colors that you're going to be using there.
Interesting. Have you had examples where you've chosen colors, or maybe seen other places where people have chosen colors that are, work well in one particular cultural context, but don't translate as well to other contexts?
It's not something that I've really done myself, but I was just, talking about this in a seminar recently, and someone brought up that point, and also talked about, they were creating graphs about kind of climate change issues and looking at intercultural interpretations of the concept of Mother Earth, and that the colors that were associated with Mother Earth were quite different in different cultures, and the need to be mindful of that if you're creating graphs that have got those strong messages within them. The other place where I've seen that this can backfire comes back to your question about why not just use your brand colors. That if you're, say, telling a story about different demographic groups and your logo is mostly green, the group that you make green, you're kind of saying is the main group in what you're talking about.
Right.
And so it's worth being mindful of that as well. If you have one main brand color, which group do you associate it with? Or do you associate it with a group, or do you just try and stay away from it and instead blend it in a little bit to the other colors that you're using?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's so much, just talking to you, and you and I have talked in the past about color, but even now I'm realizing like how much thought is involved in kind of developing palettes, and how far it goes beyond just, use your brand colors. I know that one thing you've done, because you work with organizations to help develop kind of like data viz design systems. That's what you call it, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that I know you do, both I assume in developing your own data viz design systems for organizations, as well as showing other people how to do this on their own, is you've developed a package called monochromeR, which helps with the development of palettes. So I'd be curious to have you show it, but even before we actually have you kind of show what the package does, can you talk a little bit about the package and what the idea behind it is?
Yeah, the package mostly grew out of me wanting a shortcut. So I was creating visualizations as part of Tidy Tuesday, which is an online challenge where somebody releases a data set in which you can't really put your foot in it. It's a data set about stuff that's, innocent. It'll be coffee ratings in a coffee competition, or it'll be, pets that have been found at various places and locations. So it's stuff where, yeah, it's easy to make graphs and to practice because nobody's going to be making a life decision based on these graphs. But anyway, I was taking part in the challenge. Somebody mentioned using monochrome color palettes, and I was going on to HTML color websites and looking at the gradients and picking them and copying them across. I thought it'd be so much better if I could just do this all within R. I bet there's a package for that, and there wasn't. So I thought, okay, well, I'll write it then and see where we go from that. So the idea behind monochromeR is that you take a starting color and you go darker from there, or you go lighter from there, and it gives you a range of colors, and you can specify how many colors you need. That was really the starting point for it. And then from there, I've ended up using it in creating color palettes for clients to blend in a bit of the client's color, and also to teach people about, if you're not starting from a photo and you're starting instead from colors that are in your mind that you think are good for the concepts that you're talking about, then blending in a little bit of the extra color can help it all work nicely together.
One, I will admit I haven't actually used. Oh no, that's true. I have used it once, but my understanding, based again on limited use, is it can also help you to avoid, instead of using like the HTML red, which will burn your eyeballs because it's so bright, it allows you to kind of, blend in colors to make them more appropriate for data viz. Is that am I remembering accurately that
Yeah.
package
Yeah,
helps with
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, when I first created it, it was literally just I want gradients of this color. But the more I use it, the more I use it for exactly that purpose of blending colors to make them look nicer, make them on brand. And also I use it quite a lot to change the text color around a plot as well. So I have a dark text color and a light text color that are based typically on one of the colors that's inside the plot. And that all comes from using monochromeR as well.
Cool. Yeah, so why don't you just show us how the monochromeR package works?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So let's say that we're going to start with the R for the rest colors. So we know what your hex code for your color is. So we're going to just pop that in here and generate palette. So we said it was 6A, B, D, no, 6C. There we go. So we've got the R for the rest blue. And then let's say we want to have a green color that is kind of related. Actually, no, first let's just start with the simple go lighter or go darker thing. So we're going to go darker from here. And we are going to say that I need 5 colors. And I want to see what it looks like in the plot window down here. So I'm going to say, true, if I can spell that properly. And then it gives me 5 colors that are here, that are the colors that I've asked for. And we're starting with the R for the rest blue, and we're going darker as we go. And so, this is just a simple way of getting a gradient of color palettes. I tend to use this quite a lot to create a dark text color. And then what I would typically do is take that dark text color, so I would copy that, and then pop it in here and generate a palette where I go lighter. And then that would give me some colors. There we go. And so then that gives me some colors that I could use. Say this would be the dark text color and this would be the light text color. And you might want to change, the number of colors that you create so that you've got a bit more variation there if you want to. Obviously, we've zoomed in quite a lot, so it gets messy with the labels.
Sure.
And if you want to switch the labels off, then you can do that as well. if you just want the color palettes.
So you went
yeah.
from the brand color, the blue, and then you used it to generate that kind of gradient that you would potentially use if you were doing some kind of, working with some kind of continuous variable. Would you use the first one that you did? The first palette that you made, would you use that ever for discrete data, like for categorical data?
You could do. It depends what you're talking about. So if you're talking about categorical data where you've got, say, one group that you want to really highlight, and the others that should just sit in the background, then you could do that quite nicely. Yeah, if you wanted to create a bunch of different discrete colors that are all on brand with the after the rest blue, then what we need to do is feed it a blend color instead of just going darker or going lighter. So again, we can do that. We change this here. We'll say blend color equals, and then we'll go with green because that's always fun. So this is the really bright kind of CSS green that we talked about earlier. Please do not use this as is in your visualizations, unless there's a very strong reason for it. But yeah, people will need to get their sunglasses out. So we've blended a color in, and so it tells us that it's blending. And then we get these ones. So then the fun thing that you can do is that you can, it always keeps a little bit of the initial color in here. So we've got the R for the rest blue here, and then we've blended it with the green. I think this middle color here is quite nice if you wanted a kind of on-brand green that you could use. But just to show that it keeps a little bit of the R for the rest color at the end, I'm just going to copy this one here, and then we're going to see View, Palette, and pop it here. And you can see that they're a bit different from each other. And also that the one that's got a bit of the after the rest blue in it it's just a bit less aggressive on the eye than the one that doesn't have anything blended in. So I use this quite a lot in creating palettes for clients. Sometimes you might start with something a little bit nicer, like dark green. And you can create some really nice colors because they're blending it in. And then if you say you've got a green one that you're using like this and a purple one, then combining the green and the purple together, if you were to take them and they've both got a bit of the after the rest blue, then they should work together as colors and not jar too much.
That's interesting. So by combining that blue with the green and the purple, you can get a version of green and a version of purple that will look kind of harmonious with the blue color and not just the bright green or the bright purple.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. I never thought about that as a way to generate colors that work together well. But
I mean, we can test it.
Absolutely makes
right?
sense.
So we've got that, and then if we swap in this purple here, and then we'll grab the green that we created, say this one here. We'll see if the theory holds out. But we should get 3 colors. Oops. Let's put it inside a vector. That's why that didn't work. So we should get 3 colors that work together that you could use in your visualizations. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Thanks.
Okay, so how... if you've made a palette and you're happy with, say your blue, green, and purple, how do you implement this in code? Because you don't want to have to just remember those hex codes. Like, how are you going to actually write some code that makes it reusable?
Yeah, good question. There's several ways of doing it, but the easiest way to do it, I think we'll just demo if I share my screen again, and then we can walk through what I'm doing. So we're back in the RStudio viewer, and you've got the colors that we've come up with just here. And now we're going to create a plot. So we're going to load ggplot, and I'm using the Palmer Penguins library, which contains the penguins dataset, and we're piping that into ggplot. And then we're creating points that correspond to the length of their bills and the length of their flippers and the size, and we're going to color them by species. And let's just create that and see what that looks like. So it looks kind of messy because it's all zoomed in, but you can see that we've got 3 different colors here that correspond to 3 different species of penguins. And the easy way, well, the quick way to add colors is to go Scale, Color, Manual, Values Equal, and then we would just grab the colors that we had earlier. So I'll just grab them here. And where do we plus at the end? And nope.
I think you need scale fill manual.
We need scale fill, you're right. There we go. Okay, so there we have a plot with the colors in it. I'm just gonna get rid of the gray background because that's always a good idea as well. And it'll look a bit nicer. So there we go. We've put the colors in. I'm gonna make the outline white because that'll look a bit nicer as well. And then we've got some colors in here. So the good thing about this is that it's quick and easy. The dangerous thing about it is that if someone comes around and messes up the order of the factors of the species in your data set, then it messes everything around. So let's just demonstrate that. If we do declare mutate species equals factor species for those, and we'll just put them the wrong way around. So at the moment we've got the Gentoo as green, and well, it's easy to remember because they start with the same letter, which is another trick. If you're struggling to come up with colors, just come up with a color that's got the same starting letter as the thing you're trying to describe. So if instead we make the Gentoo the first one, and the delis, and then chin strap, which are the 3 species that we know are in the data set. And that's it. I think I need to close another bracket somewhere. And if we run that again, then the Gentoo now have become blue, whereas previously they were green. And this can be really problematic because things change in data sets all the time, and you might be collaborating with people and somebody comes along and changes what order the factors should be in, and suddenly your colors don't align anymore. So the way to avoid doing that is to create a named vector instead. So we are going to say that the deli penguins are half the rest blue, and then we're going to say chin strap the purple, I think that one is, and then I'll put the Gentoo at the bottom here. And if we run that again, they should be back in the order that they were in. Yeah, so the Gentoo are now green. Even though they're appearing top on the list, the colors are staying consistent with what we had already decided that they should be. So that's great, but this is a lot to type every single time you're creating a plot. If you're reusing it within a project and say you've got 12 plots that you want to create that all use these colors. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to copy this above, and we're going to say these are penguin colors, and that's our name vector here. And then every time we want to create a plot, all we need to do is put that here, and then it will reference the colors that we've got, and ta-da, it all works. So that's one way of making sure that your colors get pulled into the plots consistently, is to set them up as a named vector where you're matching it to the different levels of your factor, and then you can make sure that it will always be exactly where it needs to be.
Yeah, that's great. And I know we won't get into it today, but I know, another thing that you do, especially in your consulting work, is you actually put this type of code into packages for organizations who want to, have even more, even simpler ways to reuse that type of code. But I think that's a good example of how, in a relatively straightforward way, you can apply your palette to a plot.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, we talked about moving the theme, and again, creating a theme that ties in with the colors that match the concepts that we're talking about and the client's brand. That's a huge part of the system as well.
Yeah. Cool. I know you've actually made a package for a client. The package is called Ophelia, where you implemented their brand colors. So can you show kind of what it looks like once you've implemented it into a package, how you then apply it to a plot?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I gave a talk about that. I think it was at our medicine last year, and it was just really fun being able to show people the before and after, and the process of working through that. We can maybe pop a link somewhere to that if you want
Yeah,
to
we'll
look
put that
into
in
the
the show
detail.
notes.
So here's our basic plot as it comes out of ggplots, and obviously, again, it's all zoomed in, so it's a little bit messy. But the first thing that we can do is with the Ophelia package is that you then say theme Ophelia, and that just one line of code changes what this looks like. Let me just get rid of the subtitle because I think this is confusing things. But part of the fun with the subtitle there is that it just fits within the plot. You don't have to figure out where your line breaks are, which is always a bit of a headache when you're creating plots in ggplot. But it's all popped inside a text box. So that's done it's changed the font, it's changed the background color, it's got two different fonts going on and different text colors as well. And then we can do this, and we'll go Ophelia, scale, fill, Ophelia. And that will bring the Ophelia colors into the penguin species that we had set up there. And then there's different ones that we can try. You could go for cool colors. Let's imagine that the penguins are all pretty chilly. We can do cool colors. If we want some warm penguins, then we can do that as well. Yeah, it's just, I really enjoy creating these because it just takes the headache away for the client if all they need to do is add 2 lines and everything's been thought of for where it should all fit. Yeah, it's just really satisfying to know that it's liberating them to spend their expertise on other things.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, yeah, we'll definitely put a link to that talk you gave because I know you go into it in even more depth. And it's just interesting to see, it's, like we've been talking, it's the combination of first coming up with a palette and then thinking about how to implement it in code. And I think that's, kind of your special sauce is that you can do both of those things, which is pretty cool. So one common response that I think, especially among kind of like hardcore data people, not all, but some, will be, it's not worth it to spend this much time thinking about, the aesthetics of your plots. Like colors aren't going to really make an impact. So I'm curious, when you hear that type of critique, what's your response? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that kind of critique is difficult to challenge because in some senses, if all you want is something functional, then you might think that the colors don't matter. But actually, the colors are so much more than just making it pretty. We talked about accessibility. A lot of the time, the default colors that people pick are not necessarily easy to see for everyone in the teams. One of my friends works in a team and is very conscious that the default colors that come out in the stuff is not accessible to his colleague who's colorblind. And so it's just really interesting that what is perfectly fine and functional for somebody might not be for someone else. So there's an empathy side to it. But actually, the colors do make it more functional. They help you remember what's what. They help you when you're creating your visualization to not have to, spend too much time. If you're checking, is that data point in the right place? Wait a minute, which group does that belong to? I was doing that earlier and was jumping between the data set and the plot and the data set and the plot. I was like, no, let me just put some sensible colors in here, and then I'll be able to see what's going on, and that'll make it easier for me in creating it. So I think. While it feels like an unnecessary investment of time to come up with these things, it actually ends up saving you quite a lot of time in the long run because it saves you time checking stuff, it saves you time interpreting stuff, it saves your readers time interpreting it as well. So yeah, it's not just about making it pretty, it is about making it a lot more functional than it currently is.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I think that idea that, maybe you spend more time up front coming up with, thinking about what's an effective color palette for your organization. Obviously, that's going to be more time than just, slapping on scale, fill, whatever. But in the long run, I mean, in some ways, it's like similar to learning R, because I always tell people when you're learning R, you're going to be a lot slower initially in R than with Excel or whatever other tool. But the more you do it, the more efficient you'll become. And it seems like it's a very similar situation with developing a color palette. Yes, it might take a little longer to come up with something effective, but in the end, it'll save you time. And of course, be colorblind friendly, be better at communicating and all that. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, last question. So I think we've established, care a lot about the aesthetics of colors, thinking deeply about colors. But if someone is not, as invested in that process, or wants to use better colors, but doesn't go to art galleries and think about how they can apply those colors to their plots, I'm curious if you can give maybe 2 or 3 tips to help them think about how to use color more effectively in their data viz.
Yeah, sure. So I guess if you're really not interested in what it looks like, but you just want to make it functional, then pick a color that starts with the same letter as the level that you're talking about. Like we did, we made the Gen 2 penguins green, and then it was really obvious that something had switched in the plot when we were looking at it the second time around. So yeah, that's a very functional way to do it. I would say consistency is really important as well. So again, even if you're not too fussed about the aesthetics of it, making sure that you've always paired the same color with the same concept throughout your report means that people can easily jump to the thing that they're interested in looking at, and not have to relearn with every plot. Okay, purple is this, but last time it was orange, and then it's going to be pink next time around, and it just gets quite confusing. So being consistent. But also, I would encourage you to think about the things that you enjoy visually, and what makes you look longer at, I don't know, a photo, or a picture, or a report, or a table, or a visualization, than looking at another one. It's probably because there's something about the composition of that you're enjoying, and so you ultimately want people to be looking at the stuff that you're producing. You want people to be remembering it, and it's worth thinking about what might help them do that. And I think choosing good colors and good fonts is an important part of that.
Great. Well, Cara, thanks so much for joining us. It was really interesting. I mean, for me, as someone who does think about color, but nowhere near as deeply as you do, I definitely learned a lot. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for today's episode. I hope you learned something new about how you can use R. Do you know anyone else who might be interested in this episode? Please share it with them. If you're interested in learning R, check out R for the Rest of Us. We've got courses to help you no matter whether you're just starting out with R or you've got years of experience. Do you work for an organization that needs help communicating effectively with data? Check out our consulting services at rfortherestofus.com/consulting. We work with clients to make high-quality data visualization, beautiful reports made entirely with R, interactive maps, and much, much more. And before we go, one last request. Do you know anyone who's using R in a unique and creative way? We're always looking for new guests for the R for the Rest of Us podcast. If you know someone who would be a good guest, please email me at david@rfortherestofus.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.